Hey financial advisors, have you been overwhelmed by the word selling or by the concept of sales? You know, there's a lot of things to do with sales, right? There's strategies, there's frameworks, there's objection handling, there's opening, there's closing, there's the emotional uncertainty that we need to deal with, the anxiety, the stress, and the pressure from our sales target, right? To be honest, like sales is also a big thing for me when I first started learning about it. And a lot of financial advisors that we coach as well, when they first come in, you know, they also struggle with the prospecting and the sales portion. Okay, so in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the top 15 sales secrets that generated me a lot of money, more than multiple 7 figures in sales, and also help a lot of our advisor clients, after about 1,000 plus of them, get a lot more sales commissions. And this is the video today. If you don't know me, my name is Benjamin Ong. I'm the founder of Authentic Advisory Systems, where we run a mastermind coaching program where we help financial advisors make more money while being happy, authentic, and purposeful. One of the reasons I really make this YouTube channel and all the videos is because I truly believe and I really do hope that by documenting the lessons that I've learned during this journey and while coaching other people might be able to help you make more money, commissions, or even help you be a little more happier in the career and everything else, right? And this would serve the purpose, and maybe one day you will want to work with us, okay? For the next, I don't know how long this video is going to take, but pay very close attention, okay, to this, because these are also some of the secrets that I took hours to really sit down and compile and consolidated the top 15. Actually, there's like about 27 of them, but I just cut it down to like the top 15. Number one, definition of sales. Okay, I think that's truly like the best way to start off when it comes to like the sales secrets kind of point of view. And the reason for that is because when every time I ask someone like, hey, what is sales all about? They have no idea, or they just kind of say, oh, it's about selling, you know, it's about value, it's about like solving problems, whatever it is, you know, and stuff like that, right? And here's always a challenge. We always want to learn about sales and learn to be better in sales, but yet we do not understand the definition of sales. Then like that's kind of like a big problem to begin with, right? So let's start out with that. Now, the definition of sales in my worldview is solving a problem with an appropriate solution in exchange for consideration, right? And consideration basically means it could be anything. It could be a favor, a trade, or whatever it is, or basically in our insurance industry, it's basically commissions or money. So solving a problem with an appropriate solution in exchange for money. That's basically it, right? In exchange for outcomes. Now, if you think about this definition of sales, then basically there's 3 parts to it, right? There's the problem, there's the solution, and then there is the money portion, right? That one is the easiest part, right? But what most people struggle with is the problem and solution, right? So let's break that down. So every time it comes to sales, the first thing that we have to understand is that we have to first identify whether the other party or the prospect basically has a problem. Because if there's no problem to begin with, or we are unable to identify the problem to begin with, then there's no solution. That makes sense, right? Because if this person has a problem and then you try to offer a solution, then what's going to happen is that it usually ends up like a missell or unethical selling. So the first thing is we need to identify whether the prospect has a particular problem that we can solve. Okay, so that's the first one. Now, that's where most advisors ends, right? Or where most salespeople ends, which is, okay, I identify a problem, and then, you know, they start pitching the solution and everything else. What usually happens is that they find out that either they get a lot of objections, they can't close, so on and so forth, right? And the reason for that is because there's 2 parts to the problem, right? First one is identify a problem. The second portion of it is you need to help the prospect realize that they have a problem. Because just because you can identify there's a problem, and maybe even if you tell the prospect that he or she is going to die, going to get critical illness at some point in time, if you say things like this, right, they might not realize there's a problem. When you and I say things like, hey, there's a chance that you might get in a hospital, there's a chance that you might get injured and whatnot, it's merely a statement that might be a fact, right? That most likely is a fact, right? There's a very high chance that you might get into all these things. But the prospect might not realize there's a problem. So you need to first identify the problem, and then number 2, once you identify it, articulate in such a way whereby the prospect realizes there's a problem for them. Because if the prospect don't realize that he or she has that particular problem, then what's going to happen here is that even if you propose a solution, the solution is only going to be a good to have. Okay, it's not going to be something that is a must-have for them. And the reason for that is because they didn't realize that they have a problem. So that's the first thing about sales there, of course, which is the problem, identifying and realizing problem. And then number 2, obviously, is the providing appropriate solution. If you ever like go for a sales appointment and then you start to realize that like, you know, you couldn't close, you know, so on and so forth, right? It's just one of those things. Maybe you didn't identify the problem, or maybe you did identify the problem, but the prospect didn't realize it. Or number 3, this prospect might not even have a problem to begin with. I mean, everybody has a problem, but maybe this prospect's problems are not yours to solve. Maybe it's a relationship issue, you know, and then you're selling like insurance investments, then this might not be you might not have the appropriate solution for that unless you're like somehow a coach in that area. Okay, so that's number 1, right? Understanding the definition of sales. And why I say this is a secret is because or like one of the top things I put it as the first is because once you understand the fundamental of sales, then all the other things that you're going to talk about, the next 14 things that we're going to talk about, will be add-on to that, and this really sets out the foundation. Now that we identified like the definition of like sales, the second key thing is coming back to the objective of sales appointments. I've coached a lot of advisors, and this is also one of the key things that really differentiates an advisor that does sales, that gets a lot of emotional uncertainty and rejection and feel very sad and on an emotional roller coaster, versus an advisor that keeps going for sales appointments, gets rejected, gets rejected, but doesn't seem to affect this particular person. A lot of people feel like it's a lot to do with resilience, but the truth is they have a different definition or objective of sales appointment. If you ask anyone, maybe your colleagues or some other advisors or salesperson, like what is the objective of a sales appointment, right? When you go for the appointment, what's the objective? What most of them will tell you, or at least especially the people in the past, older folks or majority will say is ABC, right? You know what's ABC? ABC is always be closing. Okay, in short, what it means here is that every time they go for a sales appointment, whether it's an opening or closing appointment, every time they go for it, all they care about is closing, right? All they care about is, okay, I have to close this person, so on and so forth, right? No matter what, I have to handle the objections, I have to do this, so on and so forth, and everything else, right? But I'm here to tell you that it isn't. I used to have this mentality as well of the ABC, closing mentality, but I also realized that a lot of other advisors that we coach also has it, and when we have the mentality of always be closing, it actually cripples our sales and creates a lot of anxiety that comes along with it, okay? So then the question comes is this, right? Hey Ben, if the objective is not ABC, which is closing, if the objective is not to close the prospect, then what's the real objective, right? Now the real objective, and it's just a reframe of that, right? The real objective of any sales appointment is to help the prospect make an informed decision. And that decision could be to go ahead with you or not to go ahead with you. The decision could be to buy from you or not to buy from you. That's the whole objective of any sales appointment, right? So even if you go for an opening appointment, where let's say opening you don't attempt to close, you're just maybe doing a soft recommendation, soft proposal, so on and so forth, you are delivering or articulating information in a way whereby you want to help the prospect make a very clear informed decision whether they move on to the second appointment or not, right? Which is usually the closing appointment, right? That's the whole point of your concept. That's the whole point of like the pitch, the problem, whatever it is. That's the whole point of it, right? It is not to always close them, okay? So the key thing about this is that the reason why, when you reframe the decision or reframe the objective to helping someone make an informed decision and that informed decision could be to buy from you or not buy from you, the reason why you reframe to that, right, is that first it takes off the pressure, and then number two, you also need to understand that like you cannot force someone to buy, right? Like you cannot force someone to buy from you, right? Unless, you can, like you take a gun and everything else, then that's not really like selling anymore, right? That's really like forcing someone to make a decision against their will, right? So that's not really like sales anymore. So you can't really force someone to buy or make a decision, even if they have a problem, even if your solution is like the best and you're the best person, like you can't force someone to buy. They still have to make that informed decision. And the reason why you have to reframe this thinking, and it really helped me a lot and help a lot of our advisors as well, is because if our objective is always be closing every appointment that we go to, then what's going to happen is that we will always have the results of closing and not closing, right? And in our minds, it's either we win or we lose. We get accepted or we get rejected. That's basically like how our mind works. And even if you have the best closer in your industry, the best closer in your team, your agency, your company, or someone that has like, I don't know, top awards, COD, TOD, or whatever it is, right? The truth here is that in anybody's track record, there's never 100% closing ratio, even if you're the best, right? Even if you are the best top salesman or saleswoman, you cannot have a 100% closing ratio. And the reason is not because you are not good. The reason is because like it takes both hands to clap. Like some people, the prospects, might be a prospect's problem, right? So that affects the decision and therefore affects your closing ratio. So you'll never have a 100% closing ratio. However, if you change the definition or the objective of any sales appointment is to help the prospect make an informed decision, and the informed decision is whether it could be to buy from you or not to buy from you, to move ahead or not to move ahead, then what you're going to have is not a 100% closing ratio, but what you're going to have is a 100% win rate, right? Because whether the prospect buy from you, you win. Don't buy from you, also you win, right? As long as you help them to make a clear, informed decision. What happens is that when you start having this mentality, this mindset of helping a prospect make an informed decision, then every sales appointment you go for, you feel a lot lighter. That makes sense? You feel a lot like, okay, my job is, like the only job, my only role is to really help you make an informed decision. That's it. Like, that's it. Now, of course, do I hope that you will buy? Of course, right? But in the event that you don't, then the next question I ask myself is, have I done my best in making sure that you make an informed decision? If the answer is yes, then I've won. If the answer is no, which is, shit, I should have said certain things, I should have asked certain things to help this person see certain way, yada yada, and which means to say you didn't help the process make a clear, informed decision, then of course you didn't win, right? But the whole point is that, it takes off the stress of closing, and sales is a lot to do with energy. And once you start really understanding and having this mentality of like really helping someone make an informed decision, you won't come off as desperate, you won't come off as like pushy, so on and so forth. Okay, so that's the second, number 2, right? Changing the objective of sales appointment from closing to helping them make an informed decision. Now, number 3, sales is a structured conversation. What do I mean? Let's talk about what most people are doing when it comes to sales, right? Which they don't realize. What happens is that, every time you go for opening and closing appointments, so on and so forth, for any kind of sales appointment, it tends to be a free flow, go with conversation based on feels kind of stuff, right? It's kind of like, depending on what the prospect say, depending on his or her profile, blah, 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 and then it just goes based on the feels, right? And this is like one of the most crucial mistakes. Let me share with you like a story that I just got reminded of, which was, I had this advisor that met this prospect, okay, and this prospect is about 40 years old, single mom, so on and so forth. And then basically, the advisor was just like, I think 7-8 months old. The advisor met a prospect, and then they had obviously an opening appointment. It was a cold one, right? It was a cold appointment. So they had like dinner and everything else. Oh, actually they had the appointment first. Then after that, the auntie, which is like the prospect, jailed her and asked her to basically want to have dinner or not. I think they met about 2 p.m. and they asked her to have dinner later at 6 p.m. or something like that. And then like the advisor was like, sure, right? And the reason for why the advisor was like happy about the dinner was also because like she feels that building rapport, building trust, building relationships is going to help her with like the closure, right? And so what happened was that dinner happened. They had, I think it was 90 minutes or about 2 hours dinner. And then after that, they had a movie. Okay, they literally had a movie. Like I think it was like 9 to 11 p.m. something like that. They had I can't remember what movie it was, but they had a movie. And then after the movie, they went home and everything else, right? And then this advisor went on to meet for like another 2 or 3 more times. The problem was, right, not only did this advisor didn't manage to close, this advisor did not even open up like a full recommended like suite of products that was needed. And the reason for that is because all she ever got to was do a bit of positive review, right? And then try to recommend certain things. But then the prospect, literally, on the 3rd appointment or 4th appointment, I can't remember, was saying something like, hey, you know what, actually I don't need it, blah, 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 so on and so forth, right? But I love this relationship, that you and I have, let's catch up soon. And literally that was it. The point is, right, sales is a structured conversation. Like the moment you go in too free flow, I'm not saying like we be rigid and like to the point where you can't be flexible. But the point is that when you go in, you don't have a flow, you don't have a structure, you don't have the things that you really want to say or what you want to ask, certain things that you will reply and stuff like that leads you to the outcome. Then what's going to happen is that it's going to go like away from the outcome, right? So you want to think of sales or the conversations to be, this is the beginning, and then there's usually an outcome, right? And the outcome, again, like we mentioned, is to help the prospect make an informed decision, right? Assuming there's a problem, so on and so forth. Then what's going to happen is that all the things you ask, say, and everything else has to lead to the outcome, right? Because if you think about it, from point A to point B, what is the fastest way to get from point A to point B? Straight line, right? Problem is that if you go too free flow and you don't have a structure, what's going to happen is that, imagine there's a line here, right? This is supposed to be like one line here, right? Then what happens is that the conversation will end up going up, going down, like derail from like the original outcome. And what's going to happen is your appointments will take like 2 hours, 3 hours, and then you don't even like the prospect gets tired, you get tired, and then like both of you like not achieve the outcome or move the conversation forward to the outcome. The truth is here is that you want to make sure that sales is a structured conversation. A lot of people when they hear structure or structured conversation, they will associate that with like rigidity, not being flexible, and as a result or consequence of that, it becomes like fake, right? It feels fake, feels scripted to a certain degree. Now, the way I look at it is, you just imagine, let's say, having structure is like building a house, right? No matter whether you stay in landed, whether you stay in a HDB or condo or whatever it is, there's usually some form of structure and foundation stuff that builds a house, right? Generally speaking, there's always like the door, right? The bedrooms, the living room, so on and so forth. These are like structure, right? To keep the things in place. Then with the structure, then what's going to happen is that, of course, then once you come inside, then you decide whether you want to buy certain furnitures, what kind of furniture you want to buy. Then you decide like how should the interior design look like. So to bring back to this analogy, which is having structure is like having a structured conversation, or seeing sales as some form of structure, it's like having a foundation, right, of the house. And then the interior design of the house is more like your style of like your sales, right? The way you talk. Are you the kind that is like very extroverted, you talk a lot, and then it's like a lot of energy, or are you somebody that's somebody more quiet? That's like your style. But the point I say is that like everything needs to have a sort of structure. And if you can have your own structure and a style that is congruent to yourself and authentic to who you truly are, then you're gonna be killing sales, okay? You're gonna be like really easing, and in fact, not feeling stressed by sales, but in fact like actually enjoying sales conversations, okay? Now, point number 4, asking questions more than making statements. Okay, so there's a quote that comes along with this, right? Which is, the person who asks the questions controls the conversation. Control the conversation to what? Control the conversation from point A to point B, right? To get to the outcome. Problem here is that sometimes, like I've met like so many people and advisors as well. What you and I tend to do is we usually kind of like make statements, right? You might get CI, Singapore got how many percentage of population getting cancer, it's very painful, it's a problem, it's very high risk, market is going up, market is going down, the market over a long time horizon will always go up, blah, blah, blah. Like these are all making statements. Now, making statements is not wrong, there's always time and space to really make statements. What happens is when I make a statement, or you and I make a statement, the other party or the prospect would understand, like they would logically know, right? So you think about like kind of sales appointment they had when you tell the prospect, say like, hey, so this is very important, right? This is something that's rising. You know, cancer is very important. Or as a mom, you need to have make sure that your son or your daughter, your baby is like having a shield plan or whatever it is. And then because if they don't, then you have to pay a lot of bills, right? And after that, the prospect is like, yeah, that makes sense. I understand. It seems fine, right? Until when you propose a solution, then they'll tell you that it's a money problem. They say that it might not happen to them. It's a still risk, but the risk might not happen to them, so on and so forth, right? And then you think to yourself like, okay, so what's going on? Because at the front, when you mention all these statements, like they agree and it makes sense, and it makes you feel like you're on the right track. Then after that, when you try to do the closing, suddenly like the logic, like as though they don't truly understand. And the reason for that is because when you make statements, the other person understands and knows logically. But when you ask questions, what happens is that the prospect would realize, right? And the difference between knowing and realizing is just an emotional internalization. That's the only difference, right? Like when someone says no, they know something versus they realize something, realize have a higher impact. And the reason for that is because they have an emotional realization. In the very simple terms, you and I will have experienced it. It's like a light bulb moment, right? Where you imagine in school, your professor or teacher say something and everything else, and then you're like, right? Or you'll be like, oh shit, I didn't know that. That kind of aha moment. That's what it means to have someone to realize something, right? Realize the problem, realize the solution, and everything else. And realization, more often than not, can only be achieved by asking great questions that allow them to realize or come to the conclusion themselves. In Chinese, the way I look at it is like telling someone and making a statement and they understand or they know is like 知道. Then the other one is 发现到, right? That's really the aha moment, right? And then you think about it, what logically follows is that, and you might have heard of it, which is like people buy based on emotions and then justify by logic. Then you think about it, right? When someone's know about something and understands something logically, they probably wouldn't buy, even though they understand logically, right? Because they buy based on emotions. And then when you help someone to realize there's an emotional realization, that's why they are more, they tend to put themselves in the state in which they are more in a conducive state to buy, basically, right? So that's why you want to ask questions versus making statements. Okay, that's like really the key one. So in terms of ratio, not all the time, of course it varies, but a good range or a good benchmark is that for any sales appointment, whether it's an opening or closing appointment, you want to have a good like 70-30 ratio or a 60-40 ratio. Basically, when you talk about like the 60% or 70% is where you are asking the questions, when you're opening your mouth and then like you're asking questions being short, right? And then the other 30% is more like making statements, right? So 70% asking questions, 30% making statements. That's kind of like the ratio that you want to have. So that's really on asking questions versus making statements. Number 5, there's 3 parts to mastering any sales script or sales concepts. The first one is what you say. What you say basically refers to like the script, the words, questions you have to ask, so on and so forth. So there's the what to say, right? The pitch. Okay, so I pause that. A lot of people feel like, okay, once I kind of know the script, then the script should work. And then like what happens is that when they actually practice the script and actually use the script on the real appointment, and then they end up not closing, right? And then they'll say, what do you think they'll say? They'll say like, yeah, they'll say like, hey, the script not working, right? Or you tell your boss, hey, the script not working, you know, I get this objection, blah, 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 blah. And then it's funny because maybe your boss or manager used the exact same script and it worked for them. And then you're asking yourself like, yeah, the script doesn't work for me, right? You come to kind of conclusion, and it's not that you came to the wrong conclusion. It's just that because there's other factors, right? So one is what you say, which is the script, and then second is how you say it, right? The second is how you say it, and that is actually a lot more important than the script. Now, this is still important because it's the foundation, but how you say it actually affects the results a lot. So a lot of people talk about tone. It's kind of like a little bit like tonality in that sense, and also, you know, the pauses, you know, how's your body language, whether do you like stop, you look them in the eye, you know, and then like smile and this kind of stuff, like body language, kind of stuff, like how you say it, the delivery in short, right, matters a lot. So even you talk about tonality per se, let's say I give you an example, it's like, I love ice cream, right? Like I love ice cream. I love ice cream. I love ice cream. I love ice cream. You know, it's like, you see, it's the same three words, but if you kind of like change the tonality, like it changes the meaning and therefore how the other party or the prospect perceive the words that you say, right? So there's the how to say. So you master in levels, right? First, you must always master the what, master the how, then you talk about style. So style is kind of like, you know, maybe you prefer iPad presentation, maybe you have your own like authentic style and stuff like that. I think that's where you kind of like add it in, right? It's always what, how, then style, right? A lot of people tend to like hear a little bit or kind of understand a little bit of like the what to say, the script and everything else, and then they want to edit the script, they want to change their own style, they want to add in this, add in that, whatever things that they want to add in, right? And what usually happens is that it will derail the results by a lot. Okay, so for any presentations, it could be by the way, it could be a new, you know, insurance companies always come up with new products, see? And sometimes it requires a different way of pitching, it requires a different way, a different concept presentation as well. So what usually happens is that you really want to first understand like what is the script, what needs to be said and asked, then how you should do it, then add your own stuff. So that's really a smoother way, and I think when I'm learning scripts and like creating scripts for some of the agencies and the teams that we're training, this is like the mental framework that I use as well. Now, number 6, attach to the process, detach from the outcome. This is like one of the key sales secrets I really love, that really help a lot of us as well, which is attach to the process, detach from the outcome. So what it means here is that when we go for an appointment, although we do have this objective back in our heads, right? No matter how well we want to define certain things or what the definition is talk about, there's always this feeling at the back of our head whereby we really do still want to close the deal, right? We really do want to have the commissions. So what happens is that, you know, when we go for an appointment, and if we are too attached to the outcome, which is we say certain things, we ask certain questions because we want to close the deal, what's going to happen is that we'll have a lot of performance anxiety, we have stress, and then we'll kind of like put that kind of pressure on ourselves to make sure we say the right things, ask the right questions, you know, to the point whereby it actually inhibits us from performing our best and actually having a great conversation with the prospect. And what happens is that we are not in the moment because all we care about is like the outcome. Yeah, the fastest way to not make money is to not be present and actually be attached to outcome, right? Because what happens is that when you're attached to outcome, people can sense your energy, people can sense like your intentions. So what happens is that when they can sense your intention to close, then whatever you say, they won't feel as comfortable. That makes sense? Every time you are under the pressure of sales target and everything else, just remember that you go for the sales appointment, be attached to the process and detach from the outcome. That will in fact lead you to the outcome faster than being attached to the outcome. Now, number 7. Oh, this is a huge one. Okay, this is like a huge one. And it's also when I look at like the top producers, I'm talking about people who earns like 20, 30K a month that we have, and people who are earning like 3, 4, 5 grand a month, which is still a decent income. But people who really have earned a lot more, usually, you know, it's not, once you get to a certain level, it's usually not so much about what you say or how you say it, because like the sales process is usually like okay and normal and everything else. But what happens, I realize, right, it's not even about what, it's not even like the things they say, it's not even like how they say it, it's just this energy and aura. And basically point number 7 is that if you want to be damn bloody great at sales and really like have good production and nothing to worry and everything else, right, being in good state, you know, help prospects plan or whatever it is, right, it's having leverage. The key to having a higher closing ratio, once you nail down all the fundamentals of what to say, how to say, right, is about having leverage, right? And leverage means having a full pipeline. It's all about positioning, right? And what I mean by leverage and positioning in a sales appointment context is very simple, or sales and negotiation, right? Now, if two parties come for a discussion or, you know, to achieve a certain outcome, right, what tends to happen is that this particular prospect, you know, or this party has certain agenda, has certain things that they want for themselves, And then the other person, which is a salesperson, which is you, also has certain objective for yourself. So for example, let's say you want to close based on needs and everything else, you're recommending to close a 500,000 whole life plan, right? And then the premiums is 10 grand, for example. And then the prospect, the other party says that, okay, do you still want a whole life plan? But then, maybe they only want 250,000 at 5 grand, for example. The person who has higher leverage basically means that this person is able to walk away from the deal, right? Or this person is able to not give in to a certain degree, right? And that's really the highest leverage. Now, of course, I'm not saying, and that was just an analogy, I'm not saying that if the prospect wants a lower premium, then you just say, hey, you want a low premium, I don't want to sell you, then you walk off. No, I'm not saying that, okay? It's just an analogy. Why I talk about like having leverage and having a kind of power and position is so important is because, and the way to do it, by the way, is having a full pipeline. Okay, the way to do it is by having a full pipeline. So think about it for a second, right? It's like, imagine you meet a prospect, okay? You and a prospect meet. Scenario one, you have 18 more appointments in the next 5 days, okay? You have 18 more appointments. And then the prospect is meeting you, and the prospect, if he or she doesn't buy from you, only have maybe 3 to 5 other advisors that this person can reach out to, right? But you have 18. So while both parties can walk away, let me ask you a question. If you have 18 more appointments, we agree that the way you behave, the state in which you are in when you are discussing and everything else and doing your best to help prospect, right, is different. And it's different because you know that even if you don't have the sale, it's okay because you have like 18 more appointments, and based on the closing ratio, you kind of know that, okay, based on 18, I definitely can close at least maybe 6 or 7 out of it, right? So you know you're already going to earn money, you know you're already going to receive certain form of commissions for the work that you do, right? And therefore you won't get too caught up and hung up with closing this particular prospect, right? Because you have 18 more appointments. So that's scenario one. Scenario two is, let's say it's the same scenario, prospect got 3 to 5 other advisors that you can reach out to, and then when you meet this prospect is the only person, like you don't have any more appointments after this, you don't even know where to get more appointments, like, and it's nearing the end of the month, right? Like, and you have this appointment, then what do you think is going to happen, right? You're not going to like lose the sale, you're going to in fact give so much attachment to the sale that you'll come off as desperate. They can sense the energy that, like, you want commissions from there and so on and so forth. So this actually affects a lot of the closing, right? Because it's the energy that you give off and really coming from a position of power versus a position of like weakness, right? Because you are desperate for the sale, right? So that's what I mean by having leverage and positioning. So you always want basically to have a high leverage and positioning, and the way to do it is having a full pipeline, right? So there's a quote in our community that we always talk about, which is prospecting never stops. Okay, so regardless whether you have like 10 appointments a week, you close a high net worth case, whatever it is, right? You need to understand that prospecting never ever stops. Like, it's not so much about, oh, I want to hit COT every half a year or every year or whatever it is, but rather it's more of the very fact that you can always make sure you're always in a good state. When you go for appointments, you don't have the anxiety, stress, and everything else. Okay, so that's what I realized for a lot of our top producers, who in terms of like difference in the way they do sales, is less about the script and everything else, but it's more the fact they always have a full pipeline all the time, right? So they're not even like, sometimes, I don't know if you met some of your colleagues, they are like, wow, they don't even have time to breathe. They're like, oh my god, I go back to back, miss out on certain prospects reply, so on and so forth, right? Yeah, and the reason, and that's the best. It's obviously still a problem, but I think you and I will probably want to have that problem, right? Of like having too many prospects rather than not having prospects. Number 8, this is a quick, short one, but something that's so important. Sometimes when you meet a prospect, especially cold, whether you do roadshows, cold call and whatnot, and then when you're presenting a concept or you're pitching certain things, what tends to happen here is that there will be times, 100%, that the prospect will disagree with you, right? The prospect will say something like, but I don't agree with this, I think it's that, blah, 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 so on and so forth, right? And what usually tends to happen is that when we receive that kind of like answers or kind of disagreements or whatnot, right, we will tend to get defensive. And then what happens next is we will tend to correct the prospect, right? Even though we know the prospect is wrong, 100%. Let's say the prospect totally got it wrong, right? What tends to happen is that we will kind of like correct, right? Make the prospect see sense. Because our logical thinking is that if I can make my prospect see sense that he's wrong, and then what I say is right, then it logically follows that this person would be closer to the sale outcome. This is our, by default, kind of like the way that we behave. Now, but here's the problem. When you try to prove someone wrong, if somebody is wrong, then means somebody else is correct. So if you're trying to prove that yourself, basically in short, you're trying to say that, okay, I'm correct, and you're wrong. What's going to happen is that the prospect feel that they're wrong, they're not going to be happy, and you can be very sure that more often than not, when someone feels like they're in the wrong, they will not buy from you. That makes sense? Right? So what it means to say, you can be correct, you can be in exactly right the way that you say things, the things that you say, but the point is that the moment the prospect feels that he or her is wrong, you can be jolly well be sure that you're not going to get the sale. Right? So you can have won the argument but lose the sale. Okay, so the solution to this, which is just a very simple mindset shift or the quote, right, which is in your conversations or communication with your prospect over certain matters in which both of you disagree, the intention that you want to bring across is being clear over being right. So the intention, you want to bring your intention to kind of like, reconcile the differences and disagreements, with your prospects or even with any relationship. And you don't want it to end up with a conflict or lose the relationship, whatever, right? It's to be clear and not right. Okay, because like I mentioned, if you want to be right, this means someone is wrong, and you can jolly well be sure that if the person feeling wrong, is not going to be that happy about it. But if you have your intention to be clear, then suddenly it's very different, right? Because all the things you're saying, you're not trying to justify yourself, you're not trying to defend yourself, you're not trying to prove that this person is wrong, but rather just being clear like, hey, I totally understand where you're coming from, and would it be okay if I clarify certain things? Because I love to make it clear on certain things that's happening so that you can better understand and we can be aligned on the same page, right? So it'll be clear, right? And the prospect will feel less defensive. Because trust me, when you try to justify, they also try to defend their position, right? Because nobody wants to be wrong. Okay, so it'll be clear and then not right. So number 9, there are 4 things to sell in all sales appointment. And this is a mental framework as well. Every time if the sales appointment didn't go as well, and assuming, it's nothing to do with the prospects, problem, right? Maybe it's nothing external, something to do with us. There's usually 4 things that we probably didn't do the best or didn't do very well, right? 3 plus 1, I'll call it. So the first one is concept, right? So in any sales appointment, you always want to have concept. 5 minutes concept, 7 minutes, 20 minutes, 40 minutes concept. You always need to have the concept because concept explains the why, right? Concept explains the why, or basically why they need to buy certain things, why there's a need for insurance, a need for investing, why they need to take certain actions, right? So you need to sell the concept. Number 2, then you need to sell yourself. You need to sell the who. So the who, which is yourself, could be split into like 2 different areas. One is tangible, the other one is intangible. So the tangible one could be, maybe you want to sell yourself based on the very fact that you have, 8 figures in AUM, right? Or maybe you have like 3,000 clients, or you have made over $2 million in claims, whatever it is, right? So those are the tangible stuff. Or maybe you're a lawyer, maybe you were you have, maybe you're from SMU and then some honors or something like that, whatever it is, right? Or maybe you are 50 years in the business, something like that, right? So these are tangible. So that's one way to sell yourself on external or tangible metrics. The intangible ones is really a lot to do with your personality, your core values, the things that you believe in, how you say certain things, your energy, your vibes, so on and so forth, right? So you got to sell yourself, right? Because if someone understands the concept, they understand why, but then they just don't like your face, then one you cannot help, okay, help if, okay? But if let's say they hate you, they don't like you, they think you're cocky, they think you're arrogant and everything else, then what's going to happen is that they're not going to buy from you, they understand the concept, they'll do product comparison, okay? They will go and find someone else, okay? That's for sure. Then the third one is, once you sell concept, once you sell yourself, then the third one is you need to sell the product, okay? Now I want to talk about the last one first, I'll talk about these 3 first, okay? Now the problem here is, a lot of times, we feel, when I coach a lot of advisors, the feedback is that they always feel like the objections have a lot to do with the product, right? For example, ILP, premium payment term too long, lock-in, no flexibility, fees are high, right? Or they might say that, maybe a whole life plan you pay for 30 years, 20 years, whatever it is. Or maybe a term plan covers a lot but they don't have cash value, right? Then they give objections like this, and then the first thing that as advisors or salespeople we think of is that we think that the problem or the objection has to do with the product, but it's not, right? So what do I mean? So let's take an example of the ILP, right? So when someone says that, hey, you know what, 20 years is a long time, it locks me in, there's no flexibility, I don't want to be locked in, I don't want to invest for 20 years, that kind of stuff. We think it's product. But the real truth, the real problem, the objection is actually got to do with concept, right? Because they might not have truly understood how investing works. They might not have truly understood that maybe the amount of money they invest should be money that you are okay with losing, right? And that you shouldn't invest everything else. You shouldn't invest like all your money into crypto or whatever it is, right? So they might not understand that, and that's why they feel like the payment term is long, it's lock-in, so on and so forth. Because what do they want flexibility for, right? Because if sometimes I had an objection before, they feel like, they want to withdraw every year, so on and so forth, blah, 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 and everything else. Yeah, but here's the problem, right? Warren Buffett or any investors would say, keep your money in the market in the long term, right? They might not have understood that, right? Or realize that that's the game to play when it comes to investing. So actually got to do with concepts. Again, they might not like you or they may like you, so on and so forth, right? But in short, you need to sell all these 3 things. I think advisors you guys do very well with the product portion. The two things that's not really done the best is really the concepts and also like the how you sell yourself, right? So if you can work on these three things, then that will really skyrocket your sales production, that will skyrocket, and also help you identify any shortfall in the event that you don't get to close the sale, okay, or where the problem is. Now the fourth one is in short. So I said four things, right? So you sell basically the why, you sell the who, the product is selling the what, okay? And when you sell the why and who properly and you sell it very well, the what is the easiest to sell. Okay, the what, they will buy the what easily. The last one is the how, which is conviction. Okay, you need to sell yourself. You need to have conviction in the concepts that you're selling. You need to have conviction in the product you're selling. You need to have conviction in the very fact and confidence in yourself that you're the best person for this prospect. Because if you don't feel confident, you don't have conviction in the things you sell, and then the way you do your concept is like you don't even believe that this concept is something that's good, then you can jolly well be sure that you're not going to close the sale. Okay, the strongest advisors who close a lot of sales easily are also the same group of people who have a ton of conviction in the things they say and the things that they do, and by extension of that, they have a lot of confidence and conviction in the person that they become or the person that they are. Now, number 10, help the prospect realize problem and pain. So this is really coming back to definition of like sales, right? You need to help them identify the problem and then help them realize the problem. And generally speaking, there are really two types of problems. There is unresolved pain, and basically this is kind of problem and pain that they are moving away from. So for example, let's say someone is very poor and then they don't have money. Obviously, they're trying to move away from poverty and really earn a lot of money, right? So there's a lot of pain, right? The second one is like unfulfilled desire. So this is where you're kind of like moving towards. So think of like, I'm trying to move, the unresolved pain is trying to get away from something. And then the other one is like unfulfilled desire, which I'm moving towards, okay? So in insurance context, generally speaking, it's more like for someone who's not earning a lot of money, or maybe they are earning money, but they don't want to be poor, they don't want to have anything happen to them, so on and so forth, right? You can usually use a lot to do with pain. And in fact, the poorer someone is, technically speaking, the more insurance this person needs. That's my true belief, right? Because if this person is not earning that much or have a lot of liabilities and everything else, then 100% means like, all the more this person's life and earning income ability is very, very important, right? So that's kind of like, for most people. Now, when you want to deal with like high net worth, people who have a lot of money, right? Usually, a lot of they're not really trying to move away from anything as much, right? They're just trying to move towards something. Maybe it's kind of like Maslow hierarchy of needs. It's kind of like self-actualization. Maybe they want to become a better father, a better mother. Maybe they want to leave things for their kids, estate planning, the kind of stuff, right? So it's kind of like unfulfilled desire they want to move towards. Point is, you just need to help them realize it through asking questions, and that's really the key thing. And remember one more thing, which is, remember the person who buys is the prospect, not you, right? So you need to help them to realize the problem, right? You might identify, you might realize the problem, you know the solution, but remember you're not paying yourself the money, the prospect is the one buying, right? So you got to help them realize it, okay? So that's number 10. Based on these 15 things, the first 10 are the most important ones, and then like 11, according to like ranking, 11 to 15 are bonuses, slightly more advanced stuff that you can really add in. Like sales is going to be like so easy. So that's about 11, right? The best tonality and energy that you can have comes from intentions and conviction. Okay, so I repeat, the best tonality and energy that you can have or you can bring to an appointment comes from sincere intentions, basically, and strong conviction. When it comes to sales appointment, if your intention is to close, people can sense it, it's not going to be the best energy. People will be wary, right? Because it's always like the kind of vibe that people can feel and can sense. It's like that sensitive, right? So the moment they feel like you're asking questions because you want to close them, you want to get their answers to use against them. And that's why your prospects are scared to tell you things, right? Because they're afraid that whatever they say, you're going to use it against them. And then they get trapped, it gets uncomfortable, right? And therefore, they rather shut up and just tell you a little bit here and there, right? So energy is important, and the best way to have energy and tonality is to come from a place of having sincere intentions. And the intention, remember, is to help the prospect make an informed decision. So that's really for intention. Now, the second one is conviction, right? So, people talk about tonality and body language. They talk about NLP. They talk about like, I don't know, profiling, DISC, Enneagram, personality types, ENT, whatever fucking J or whatever it is, right? And it kind of like, need to tailor certain things to the prospect, whatnot, etc., etc. Those things works for sure. Just ice. And to me, I just feel like they are like icing on a cake. Like it works, it helps. But I don't think these are like the 80-20 kind of thing. the easiest way to kind of improve your tonality and have the best tonality is to have conviction. Because when you have conviction in the things that you say, you can't fake it, right? When you have conviction, you can't fake conviction, right? Because conviction is whether you have is like you have it inside you or not, right? You can't just because like someone can talk louder doesn't mean they have conviction. That makes sense because conviction is like an energy thing, like you can feel it, right? You gotta have like strong conviction, and when you have strong conviction in the things that you say and what you truly believe in, the things that you say, the questions that you ask, right, will come off with the kind of energy that people can sense that, oh my god, like this person truly believes. And which brings to point number 12. Sales is a mirror game. Sales is a mirror game. What do I mean? You think about like sales, right? What we're really trying to do from a more metaphysics, intangible standpoint is transferring of energy from us to the other prospect, right? Transferring, intentions, energy, and everything else, and beliefs, in fact, to the other person. What do I mean? So you just imagine, right? A prospect who came in to meet you for insurance, doesn't believe in insurance, might be skeptical, might not have bought insurance, right? Might not have the knowledge even. And what essentially you're doing, and when you go for a sales appointment, is we're transferring our knowledge, our energy, our intentions, our beliefs. We believe in insurance, we have knowledge about it. What you're trying to do is we're trying to convey and transfer those things, tangible or intangible, to the other prospect. You think about your prospect understands about insurance, truly believes in it, just like the kind of conviction that you have. What are the chances of this prospect not buying? Gotta be low. 100% gotta be low, right? Because this is also the reason why some of you, before you join the industry, you might be a non-believer in insurance, you might be a non-believer in ILPs, but once you studied certain things, you've been through it, you get an idea, you truly understand, you're like, oh my god. You might even be thinking yourself like having the kind of coverage is not even enough. You always want to buy more. That makes sense? And that's because you have the conviction, the beliefs, and knowledge, and everything else. And when you meet a prospect, you're transferring them. Which is why point 12 is sales is a mirror game, right? If you yourself are not convicted in the things that you do and sell, the things that you say, you do not truly believe in certain things, or you don't even have confidence in yourself, like not as an advisor, but you don't even truly believe that you are the person that the prospect should buy from, then what's going to happen is that, if let's say you only think of yourself as, if you rate yourself as a person, and then you're 10 being like you're the perfectly imperfect human, right, which is 10 out of 10, and then 1 is like you're the most horrible, lousy human being, and you rate yourself as a 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10, right? Or if you rate yourself in terms of your confidence and conviction level in the things that you say and do, and it's a 7 out of 10, right? A 6 out of 10, a 7 out of 10. Then what's going to happen here is no matter what you say, how you say it, or no matter how much you try to fake it, what's going to happen is that the prospect's confidence in you will never exceed how much you see yourself. I repeat, the prospect's confidence and conviction to buy from you will never exceed more than how you see yourself. So if you see yourself as a 7 out of 10, 6 out of 10, then what's going to happen here is that the prospect, no matter what you say, the prospect will feel at best a 6 out of 10 conviction to buy from you. That's why I say sales is a mirror game. It's a reflection of the things that you say, how you do, and who you are as a person. If you feel, right, if you rate yourself, how trustworthy are you? From 10 out of 10 and then like 1 out of 10, right? Like if you trust yourself only like 5 out of 10, then what do you expect your prospects to trust you 10 out of 10? Why should a prospect trust you? They shouldn't, and they wouldn't, right? So it all starts within, right? You got to trust yourself, you got to have confidence, you got to have conviction in things that you do, and when you have that as a person, and this also kind of like encapsulates the entire idea of like people buy you, right? People buy who you are, people buy what you do, not what you do, right? So you got to become that person, and when you become that person, sales is easy. I just remember one question that I've written down here, which is the golden question we ask ourselves is this. And this is how, so maybe your question is right now is, okay, so Ben, how do I improve myself? How do I become a more confident, developed salesperson, or even as a person as a whole? And here's the golden question, right? Which is, ask yourself, if you are the prospect, would you buy from yourself? Or the other variation of it is, to what degree or to what extent will you buy from yourself? That's the question. So if let's say, for example, in a hypothetical scenario, you're trying to pitch a 20,000 per year premium in an ILP for 10 years. Then the question here is, would you trust yourself enough to invest 20,000 in yourself per year? To manage the money, make sure it doesn't always go down, like you're really doing your best. Like, how confident are you? Would you buy yourself or not? Will you buy from yourself or not? Maybe you buy from yourself 1K a year. Will you buy for yourself like 20K a year, 50K a year? Would you? Because if it's not going to be a 10 out of 10, then this reflects. Let's say it's a 6 out of 10, right? Let's say how will you buy from yourself? Maybe it's 6 out of 10. Then what I would love you to do is a simple exercise, which is the 6 out, you say you rate yourself 6 out of 10, right? The chance of you buying from yourself. Then what's going to happen here is that out of the six, right? Write down the reasons why you feel like you should buy from yourself? Why you believe that you should buy from yourself? Why do you believe that people buy from you? Like you write down whatever points that contribute to 6 points. The remaining 4 of them are the things they can work on. Ask yourself, why do you feel like you shouldn't buy from yourself? Why do you have this doubt in yourself? Why do you think that you can't trust yourself enough to like invest 50,000 a year, a high premium, whatever it is? Why? Right? Write those reasons down. Right? And this is the most beautiful classic kind of exercise. Why? Because only you know yourself better than anyone else. Because only you know yourself for 24 hours. You know when you're slacking off. You know when you're being lazy. You know what you're thinking. You know where at certain times you need to do certain things but you don't do. Only you know. Because the other person knows yourself so much. Then what's going to happen is that we write down the reasons why you don't want to buy from yourself. And then next step is to just work on it. Right? So that you're working towards yourself and becoming a 10 out of 10 kind of person. That's basically point number 12, right? So point number 13, preframing is 80% of your sales results, right? Everybody heard of 80-20 rule, right? 80 Pareto's law, principle, whatever it is, right? That states that 80% of results come from 20% of the actions or costs or whatever. Now, there's another principle. It's called 1585. And 1585 basically states that 85% of your results comes from the first 15% of the process. I repeat, 85% of the outcome or the results that you want comes from the first 15% of the process. So contextualize it. Let's say your outcome of the sales appointment is to close. Right? Let's say you really do want to close the sale, right? Now, in order for you and I to close the sale, we think that it's an objection handling that needs to handle well, so on so on. No, it isn't. It's actually what matters truly the most is the first 15% of the process. And the first 15% of the process in any sales appointment usually has a lot to do with what? The rapport, the agenda, and kind of like concept that itself. So like these few things are the key things that actually matters the most. And one of the key things that you want to do in a sales term is called pre-frame. You can pre-frame 2 different types of things at the beginning of the session, right? As pre-frame, implies like you say certain things, you ask certain things before like anything else happens, right? So there are 2 things, right? So the first one is you can pre-frame things that you want to happen at the end, or you can pre-frame things that you do not want to happen. It's as simple as that, right? So let me give you an explanation, or let me break that down. Let's say at the end of the appointment, you are going to ask for referrals, right? And you want them to give you referrals. What usually most people do is that they will not tell the prospect they want referrals, right? They will wait until the end, then, hey, by the way, since you said this was good, do you have anyone to refer? Then what's going to happen is that the prospect, you and I both know, will get caught off guard. They will not tell you the names, and then they'll say they think about it. And then you don't get referrals, right? Now, if you pre-frame at the front, and pre-frame, you might sound something like this. Hey, Mr. Prospect, I'm going to run through this concept presentation. I'm going to do ABC today, so on and so forth. Now, what usually happens is that at the end, I will usually ask for referrals. And the reason why I ask for referral is because ABC reason. Here's the deal, okay? Only if my presentation is good, and if you truly enjoyed today's session, then you give me a referrals. If you truly don't believe that this is good or whatnot, then don't give. Does that sound fair? Fair enough? Okay? So the person says, okay, cool, sounds fair, agree. Then what's going to happen here is that at the end, obviously you got to do a great job, which you should. If not, you shouldn't deserve referral. But let's say you do a great job at the end, and then you ask for referral, and then you just say that, hey, Mr. Prospect, remember at the beginning of the conversation, I mentioned about blah, blah, blah. And since you mentioned that, this session was impactful, you had a lot of light bulb moments, so on and so forth. What I'm going to do next is going to ask you questions so you can pay it forward to other people. So you realize, like, that's make things a lot smoother in terms of getting the referrals, right? Just by pre-framing at the front. That makes sense, right? So that's what pre-frame does. Another one is you can also pre-frame halfway through certain things, right? So for example, let's say you're pitching an ILP, right? Let's say you pitch everything already, and then what's going to happen is that, nearing when you're pitching a product, usually one of the things we need to talk about is investment fees, right? And this is one of the most common objection where your prospect will say, hey, the fees are high, expensive, I don't want to pay for it, I should rather do robo-advisors, so on and so forth, right? So instead of saying the fee and then waiting for your prospect to give you an objection about the fees, you can pre-frame by saying that, hey, Mr. Prospect, these are the fees for this is this percentage, X percentage, and Y percentage, right? And allow me to explain why are we paying for this, right? Because it seems a little bit relatively higher to other people, but allow me to explain why you're paying for this so that it makes sense, right? Because if I were you, if I just look at these numbers, it wouldn't make sense. So allow me to explain why the companies make us pay for this. Then I'll explain, right? Then you go and explain, it's for, unlimited fund switching, blah, 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 fund management, whatever it is, okay? Then you justify and then you explain. So what happens is that when you pre-frame that, and then the prospect, oh yeah, that makes sense, then you realize that they don't even have an objection about the investment fees. But if you just tell someone, okay, annual management fee, total fee, policy fee is a 5.6% of your account value. Actually, the moment you say that, you don't say anything else to kind of like pre-frame why we are paying for these fees, your prospect is definitely going to tell you, like, give you objection. That makes sense? And when a prospect gives you objection, you're going to end up justifying, you're going to end up defending, and that is never a state or situation in which you want to be in when you're dealing with sales, right? Because it just sounds, that you're trying to defend, and the energy just shifts. This is the whole point of like pre-framing, okay? So pre-framing is the key thing. What you don't do at the front, you pay for in multiples at the end. You don't set an agenda at the front for how you want your appointment to be like. You pay for in the consequences because your prospect will start setting agenda for you. They'll say, I want to know this, I want to ask that, please tell me, and then send me the policy documents, and then they get out. They fuck off, and then like you lose the sale. They set an agenda for you if you don't set it. By the same token, if you don't talk about the referrals one, you're not going to get referrals at the end. If you don't tell them that it's going to be 45 minutes, it's going to be 30 minutes, you don't set a kind of like agenda and tone, then what's going to happen is that they will halfway take out their phone, start calling their friends, texting, they say they got to leave, yada yada, so on and so forth. So that's why pre-framing is actually important. That's point number 13, you're nearing the end. Point 14, value over selling. I know we started this entire conversation, this video on like topic of sales and talk about selling, but one of the things that I want to encompass, instead of looking at just the word selling, for a lot of other advisors of salespeople that feel like sales is so easy and actually enjoy sales and love sales a lot, it's because they come from a lens or look through a lens of value. Basically, value is solving a problem that your prospect wants to solve with a product solution that's going to help make their life easier, right? And that's valuable to them. And when you kind of think of like your appointments, and even when you're prospecting as a form of providing value, then what's going to happen is that you'll be reinforced to want to do more of it, right? You want to go for more sales appointment if you know you're providing value, right? And how does value look like in a sales appointment? That's also a question, right? Because what happens is that when you go for a sales appointment, you tend to think that, it's about opening, closing, and then you try to sell them, and then you get comps, right? Which is the case when it comes to definition of sales. The thing here is that you need to start seeing, like, I truly believe that every time you go for a sales appointment, like whether you're doing roadshows, you're doing whatever it is, right, you are actually providing value. The only problem here is that you and I might not have identified what is value, like in the things that we do, like, is this valuable? Or we might choose to not see it as value. So let me give explanation. We think that by asking questions, or let's say we do a concept presentation, our point of view is do concept, we sell the concept so that we can sell the product, right? And everything has make a lot of things easier. And as a result, we don't feel like that's valuable, right? We don't feel like sharing the concept is valuable. But you need to start seeing the very fact that when you share a concept, you are to a certain degree educating them. You're in a certain degree transferring your knowledge, beliefs, and who you are, and more important, your energy to this prospect. Right? And you got to see that as valuable, because the truth is, before this person met you, this person might not know about insurance, this person might not know about how investment works. By the way, I just want to add one more caveat. Just because someone or your prospect already have an advisor, already have policies that they have bought, does not mean they truly understand why they need it or what are these policies even to begin with. Right? This is a fatal assumption that we advisors usually make. We think that just because someone got policies, got agent, means, this person in good hands, cannot help. No. Because my question is, how do you know what the advisor said? How do you know what they truly understand? How do you know? Right? You're making an assumption. Instead of making an assumption, you need to understand that when you're providing value, providing a concept presentation, educating them, running through again and everything else, helping them to understand even deeper, you're providing value. Even if the person doesn't buy from you, you have provided value. Or I give you another example or another situation for this, right? That I see as value, which is asking questions, right? When you talk about sales, I talk about asking questions. And sometimes when you ask questions, you're helping them realize certain things, or maybe ask even certain thought-provoking questions. These are, to me, right, if I ask these questions and the prospect realizes, sees things differently after I ask that question, that is value, right? Because I have given them clarity, I've given them understanding. And clarity is the key thing that most people need. Clarity in life, right? Most people don't know what they want to do in life. Most people don't know why they do what they do. Most people don't even know like what kind of insurance and why they even need it. They need clarity. That makes sense? And especially a policy document, it's got so many tons of pages, so many wordings, right? They need clarity. And when you can explain to them, when you can help them, when you can ask them questions that allow them to realize certain things, that is value. What would be very helpful is to start coming from a place of value. And even if the things that you're doing, you are already providing value. You got to identify and choose to see that as providing value. And really, if you come from value, it also removes the stress and make it enjoyable as well, right? Here's an interesting observation also, which is the ones that truly wins in sales are also the ones, or also the advisors that provide the value upfront without earning anything from it. So for example, maybe they help with certain nomination, maybe they help to optimize their CPF, and then now, they say CPF, you don't earn any commissions from it, for example. Then what's going to happen is that like they provide value, they didn't earn anything from it, right? But then from there, because you have already provided value, people will tend to want to move on to the next step with you. So one of the things I've learned, that took me years to learn, which is this, right? People buy from you not only because of the value that they're going to get after they buy from you, but because of the value that you provided upfront. That's why they buy. People buy not only because of the value that they're going to get from you after that, but because of the value that you have provided upfront, right? So this took me like years to learn and everything else. So this is something that, I hope it's going to be helpful for you. Last one. This is 90, I don't know, I safe to say more than 90% of advisors don't do it, okay? So the last one, now 15, and we wrap this up, right? Which is the person who cares about the prospect the most wins. I repeat, the person or the advisor, the salesperson who cares about the prospect the most wins. What I mean by care, right? So 90% of more than 90% advisors are like, we care for clients, right? But when it comes to prospect, it's kind of like, okay, you're the prospect, if you don't want to buy, then it ends up in my phone list, which I'll call you back 6 months later, and then hopefully you are open to me talking to you and selling for sales targets, right? So that's usually what most people do. And when I say care, you got to care for your prospect just like you care for your clients, right? Maybe not to the same degree, but to varying degrees, right? For example, we have lunch with them, catch up with them, right? Send them certain articles or certain things that you have created for yourself that could be helpful for them. Or maybe you know this prospect had an objection of investing and then you didn't manage to close the investment, but you realize this prospect also have another problem of budgeting, for example. Maybe can you create your own budgeting template which you have used yourself and then like help and send to the prospect. It could help them, right? Care for them, right? So on and so forth, right? And it might sound very like flaky, it sound like very fake, or I wouldn't say fake. I think it sound like, is it going to get me any sales or whatever it is? We have tested and proven, right? We have an advisor that, got rejected from a cold prospect for investment after pitching, caught up with this prospect for lunch once a month for like the next 3 months. So only just once a month, just 1 hour, it's just a by the way thing. On the third lunch appointment with this prospect, the prospect said, hey, by the way, about the investment you talked about last time, I want to invest now. It was just a 3 months different. And by the way, it wasn't a budget problem. Like this person didn't change work or whatever. It's just like, hey, I just decided. And because they built a relationship, they realized that this advisor cared. And your prospects are always looking for someone that cares for them. Always looking for that, right? So if you can do that, you always win. You can always think about your prospects, think about your clients, you always win. They always buy from you. They always come from you. They always refer people to you. That is really the 15 points, the 15 sales secrets that I compiled and learned over the last 6 years, doing sales myself and also coaching more than 1,000 advisors, okay? Truth is, like, these 15 secrets really work well for me, and we also teach our clients that, and really hope that it might work for you in your own business. Point is, hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments below which one or which top 3, okay, let's say which top 3 secrets or lessons do you love the most, right? And why? Just put it down in the comments and so that I would know. Okay, so once again, thanks for watching the video and I'll see you in the next one.